Welcome to Aging in Place Strategies and Answers with Linda Prio. Will it be possible to remain in my home as I age? Do I feel safe in my home? How do I figure out how much support I will need when my health needs start to change? What if I decide to move into a community instead? Which community will meet my needs now and in the future? Who will play a role in helping me with decision making? Do you ask yourself these same questions? Aging in Place Strategies and Answers can help you gain practical knowledge that will help you create your own Aging in Place roadmap. If you are already a care partner, a power of attorney, or in crisis mode with your Aging in Place strategy, you will learn what you need to know that you don't know. For over 20 years, I have been marketing Aging in Place services to clients and educating families and healthcare professionals in how to put aging in place strategies into place. When you utilize aging in place, you are allowed to choose where you want to live and make those decisions so that you can retain your quality of life. Welcome back, everyone, to Aging in Place Strategies and Answers. And I'm going to start today's podcast with some questions that you can answer about your own habits. How would you describe yourself? Are you more of a procrastinator or a doer? Another great question I have for you today is, were you a doer before you retired? Or have you let your to-do list go out the window? Are you describing yourself perhaps as someone who works better under pressure? Well, I've heard from some friends lately that in retirement, it can be very easy to put things off until tomorrow because you think, air quotes, that you have more time. But then honestly, do you ever get around to those things that should be on your to-do list? Are you starting to have some negative thoughts about yourself because you haven't been able to get started on that to-do list? And now all of a sudden that list has gotten longer. Well, my new retirement gifts to those who have started their process of retiring or who have actually worked their last day, I'd like to hand out a new planner to those people because it's time to make new plans. It's time to start thinking about what's next. And another book that I like to hand people is called I Retire for Him, and it was written by Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and their philosophy is that if you still have a breath, you're not done. Well, I think those two items can really help people rethink their retirement and start their retirement off correctly by creating a focus, staying on track with what needs to get accomplished from day to day, and then make a new plan, a plan to explore new options available to them in their longevity and in their new role as a retired person. Now, in my work life, I'm going to be honest, I feel better when I accomplish more, and I tend to accomplish more when I have a task list. I usually try to assign a priority and then a date that it's due by. I also have learned this about myself, that I really don't work better under pressure. I work better in advance, so I have time to think through and review. But I also tend to put off difficult projects that require more time when I am less busy. And sometimes that could be a problem with a busy calendar. I also tend to put off projects that are huge, where I need a lot of education or I need to get more information in order to even figure out where to begin. So hopefully you found yourself on my list today, but no matter how you describe yourself, you're in luck today because I have Polly Lemire with me, who started her own company at age 79 that is called Thrive after 65. But before I introduce her, I want to give you her bio. Now, Polly has had a career in sales and marketing, so she and I have that similarity. She was an account executive for several broadcast stations, a wholesale marketing specialist, and recruiter in the insurance industry. Plus, she also did a gig as a corporate management trainer for a communications company. After learning about the groundbreaking research by Dr. BJ Fogg, author of the book Tiny Habits, Polly knew that she wanted to be a certified Tiny Habits coach. And so, for those of you who do not know BJ Fogg, and I didn't know him, he is a renowned behavior scientist from Stanford with over 20 years in research. He has also helped countless people create a happier, healthier life that is easy and fun. Yes, fun. So let me introduce you to my guest today. So, Polly, please say hello to my listeners and tell me how you found out about BJ Fogg and his research and why this is so interesting to you.
Well, first of all, Linda, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate having the opportunity to share what I've learned with your listeners. I have long been interested in the field of behavior change and motivation. Actually, for probably now I can't believe I'm saying it, more than 50 years.
That's
Back
okay.
in
It
the
just shows your experience.
That's right. And back in the 1970s, in the very early days of that company, I was a lecturer for Weight Watchers. And I was quite successful at doing this. I loved the idea of motivating people to give up the martini so you can wear a bikini and all of this kind of thing. And what happened and the reason I left was there were too many times that I saw somebody lose more than 100 pounds and come back a year later with that plus another 25 pounds back. And there was just something wrong. We were teaching people how to lose weight, but there were just no tools around. There was something missing because the incidence of people being able to keep that, there was no way people could not keep that weight off.
So they were learning the structure of how to take the weight off, but not how to keep the weight. So that was the
right.
disconnect. Okay.
Right. And that's been a problem in the whole weight loss industry since the beginning of time, I am sure. So as a result of that, I became very interested in the whole field of personal development. And I started taking every personal development seminar. I've done LifeSpring. I've done stuff with Tony Robbins, Wayne Dyer, you name it. And I've probably done it or read about it, all the way to neuro-linguistic programming and the application to communication styles, everything. About 3 years ago, my daughter sent me this video of a TED Talk by Dr. BJ Fogg. And all of a sudden, the lights went off in my head because what he said was, well, two important things. Number one, the first thing that he said was that how can I say this? The most important thing he said was that you can create new behaviors without using willpower. And probably that's the thing that really caught my mind. The other thing was that it's not about the behaviors, it's about the habits. And the problem from Weight Watchers and all the other things that I had studied was that you could teach people new behaviors, but how did you keep it going without using willpower? And so he taught me that little video taught me, number one, that you can change behavior without willpower. And number two, instead of looking at the whole swath of behavior, it's getting down to the tiny little habits that create the behaviors. And when I saw that, it was just a life-changing realization to me that the reason people had failed back 50 years ago in losing weight was because we never taught them new behaviors. And number two, we always assumed that it took willpower and, all kinds of to be able to do that, which made it seem impossible, really, for a lot
Yes.
of people.
Yes, because people think that I don't have the will to change, or I'm in this cycle, so how could I possibly change? And it really brings it down onto a totally different level, Polly. So I'm so glad you're bringing this out today for all of us. So thank you for doing that. What else
I
did
think
you want to
the
add to
other
that?
thing too is not only do we fail at changing what we want to change, but then we add this extra layer of sort of moral condemnation that therefore I am a procrastinator, or therefore I don't have control over my eating habits, or we add another layer of self-recrimination that should doesn't need to be there.
That's life changing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it can really be helpful, and I'm thankful again that you're bringing this up, because I feel it's going to change people's thought process just hearing you mention those two items. And there's so much more to the whole process, but it's fairly easy. When you and I had an initial conversation, you told me that you had to apply to get into the course to become a certified tiny habits coach. And I had to laugh when Polly told me that she was not their typical student. Just share a little bit about that for yourself,
Well,
because
the first thing I think I should say is that the first thing that occurred in my head when I thought to myself, I want to show other people this is magic. Can change the whole life of somebody. The first thought that came into my head was, you are too old to start something new. It was what I call an old lady thought. And it amazed me because I've always been, I feel that I'm young at heart. I'm a pretty high energy person. I'm pretty much self-motivated, but it amazed me that even as glorious as I think I am, I have still absorbed these assumptions about aging from our society without even realizing it, because that thought really stopped me in my tracks. And it took me probably a couple of months to actually screw up the courage to call up these people. Because the other thing I assumed was that everybody who was applying probably had a PhD or a master's degree and this kind of thing or that, or they were already certified and this and that. And I felt, well, I'm just, a little old lady. What changed for me, especially after going through the whole process of becoming a coach, was that actually, in fact, I do have a PhD, and my PhD is in life experience. And when I started realizing that, and the more I've gotten into this and gotten to know other coaches, I realized I've got things that other people don't have, and it's experience. And that counts for a lot. And it doesn't matter what the numbers are or how many birthdays I've had. In fact, for the people that I want to talk to, I think probably more attention will be paid to what I say because I am now 82 years old rather than some little 30 something telling you, well, you can lead a better life as an older person, blah, blah, blah.
I agree with you on that. And the one thing, anybody who's in sales and marketing, and account executive, you're reading people all day long just to see if they've received your message, if they're tuned into what you're saying, and then you're able to kind of change your messaging around so that you can make a connection with that person in some way. But I agree with you, Polly. I could see myself taking that information from you, knowing that you do have that life experience and that you've seen the failures, not only corporately and in your professional life, but also probably in your personal life too. Areas that, I wish I was doing better in that, but I'm not. So how can I change my behaviors? And then being able to get all this education and all this training. Well, Polly, sometimes I can get some bad habits going that are working against me instead of for me. Can you help me and my listeners learn more about this groundbreaking research that can help us rewire our brains? Are you ready for it? at any age.
At any
Okay.
age.
So I don't
Absolutely.
care if you're a senior listening to this, if you're an adult child who's working with seniors listening to this. I don't care if you're professional or how you found this podcast. Polly is going to share how we can help rewire our brains at any age. And it was, I do remember the sentence fun, something about this being fun.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
go ahead.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to use just a classic example as it relates to just procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be, especially I've been a caregiver also for about, more than a decade. And a lot of times I would walk into the client's house of the person that I would be taking care of, and on the desk or on most likely the dining room table would
Oh,
be this
yes.
huge stack of papers. And that's what I want to talk about and use as an example of how tiny habits can change the way we look at that stack of pile and how we deal with it. Number one, I want to tell everybody who's listening, there is nothing wrong with you if you put off dealing with a pile of paper. There is nothing morally wrong with you. You are not a person who has, no willpower and disorganized. And so the first thing I want you to do is just give up all those bad names that you've been calling yourself. Instead, the question I want you to ask yourself is, what is making this or any overwhelming situation, what is making this hard to do? And I'll tell you what's making it hard to do. It's not the pile of paper. It's that each piece of paper represents a decision.
Yes.
And if you pick up that piece of paper, then there's maybe other decisions you're going to have to make with that piece of paper. Where to put it? Are you going to keep it? Are you going to throw it away? What other steps have to happen because of this piece of paper? So it's not the pieces of paper, it's all those decisions. And what happens is our brains jump forward to the end. We skip ahead and we think, oh my gosh, when I look at this this pile of papers, it will take forever to get all of these pieces of paper done. I'll never get it done. It's way too much for me. Our brain does that because our brain has a negative bias. Ever
Okay.
since the dawn of time, our brain has been training to look out for the negative things in our life. So it's always looking for the negative outcome. That's just its and that's just its way of protecting us. It doesn't mean that we are negative. It just means our brain has a negative bias.
Okay.
And once we understand that, then we can take a look and say, well, wait a minute, wait a minute. What is making this hard to do? Well, I'm overwhelming myself with thinking I have to do all these decisions and take care of all of these pieces of paper at the same time. We don't have to. All we have to do is start by creating a tiny habit.
Okay.
And this is what a tiny habit is. This is the secret.
This is the secret, folks.
Right.
Right
Number
here, right
one
now.
is to set up a prompt. Not a sticky note, not a reminder on your phone, but something from your own behavior that's going to be there every day that will remind you it's time to look at a piece of paper.
Okay.
So an example of a prompt would be after I finish my breakfast, or after I take the dog for a walk, or after I have my lunch. Though that is a prompt, okay? And it's tied to your own behavior because it's always there.
Okay.
It's always going to be there. So first of all, you have to have a prompt. And I'm going to use after breakfast.
All
Then
right.
you have the action. And the action is a tiny action, a teeny action. It's one piece of paper.
Okay.
All you have to do after breakfast is say to yourself, after breakfast, I will pick up one piece of paper.
Okay.
Now, you may simply pick up that one piece of paper and decide to put it in the wastebasket. You may simply look at it and write down the next step, or you may simply look at it and put it back down. That's all you have to do is pick up that piece of paper.
Okay.
Anything else that you do with it is a bonus. And the reason we do it that way is because some days You're going to be full of energy, and you'll pick up that piece of paper and you'll do a bunch of other stuff with it. And maybe you'll even go on to a third or fourth piece of paper. But some days you're not going to be able to do it at all because maybe you had to go to a doctor's appointment, or maybe you're away on vacation, or maybe you're visiting your grandchildren. But when you come home, that prompt after breakfast is still there.
Okay.
And then you go and you look at the one piece of paper. And if you want to just look at the one piece of paper and put it back down, that's fine. But the chances are you're going to do something with it. Now, here's the most important part of all. And this is a secret sauce. And this is probably the biggest thing that I have learned from the field of neuroscience. When you pick up that piece of paper and you've done what you said you were going to do, which might be just looking at it, the next step is to celebrate that you did it.
Okay.
If there's one thing that we have really underestimated in our culture, it is the value of self-reinforcement. Because when you celebrate that you did that thing, yay, I did the piece of paper, good for me, woohoo. Or even if you just smile and say, I did what I said I was going to do.
I followed through on my prompt and
I took my action. What the celebration does is it releases a little small dose of dopamine in your brain.
Okay.
And that makes your brain say, ooh, I like that feeling. I want to go and do it again. And if you don't believe me, if anybody who's listening to us today, this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're listening to us, if you've ever had the experience of scrolling through Facebook or scrolling through TikTok or playing a game, do you know why you keep on doing it and time flies? Because every time you finish the game or go on to the next thing, dopamine is being released and your brain says, ooh, I want to do more. So you do more. All right. It's the same thing with habits. When you celebrate that you did the habit, your brain is automatically going to want to do more. And the celebration can be, for me, it's always, I like to do a big celebration.
Okay.
However, your brain does not know the difference between celebrating that you just won freestyle swimming in the Olympics, climbed Mount Everest, or simply picked up the piece of paper. And that really spreads on to the rest of you, that sense of accomplishment. When you start keeping these tiny promises to yourself, your self-confidence grows. Your belief in your own ability to take action grows. And especially as we get older, it's been my experience anyway. It's like there's so much that we have absorbed without even realizing. All those old lady thoughts, they start to disappear because we start believing in ourselves. So our self-confidence grows, our self-esteem grows, our life energy grows. Boy, I can do all kinds of things. I just have to start just in tiny little steps, and I can do it.
After breakfast.
And after that, in fact, when I first built my workshop, I called it Tiny Habits for Joyful Living, because you just simply become more joyful. You become more optimistic. You feel more at cause in your life. And if there's anything that I guess that really drives me to do what I'm doing, it's to fight against the fact that in our society, as we age, we tend to shrink. We tend to think smaller. Tend to think of ourselves as being less just because our circumstances have changed, and we don't have to be that way. We don't have to think smaller. We don't have to be smaller. Maybe we have to do things in smaller steps, but we can still do big things.
Yes, I was sharing with Polly before we chatted online now, was that I had taken a tumble. And I said, if it had been a 30-something, nobody would have looked at him twice. But, my daughter the other day, she said, you need to get rid of your high heels. And I'm like, come on now. All I did was fall. But Polly's absolutely right. As a senior, you pull yourself inward. And then your shoulders start drawing inward, and then your head starts drooping. And then you start thinking, I'm old and I cannot do anything. And so then what's going to happen from that point? So again, being a tiny habits coach, Polly would say to me, Linda, that's an old lady's thought and you need to stop it right there because you just showed us how to flip that switch, Polly, that negative bias.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's by sprinkling your day with small intentional actions and celebrating every time. I celebrate when I park the car parallel parking on this, next to the sidewalk. I celebrate when I actually finish the laundry the same day that I started it.
Now, let me know what kind of celebrations are you like applauding yourself secretly? Are you like pumping your
I
arms?
actually go, yes, I did it. Good for me. Especially after exercises, which is I hate doing exercise the most. That was my first tiny habit, was just starting to do exercise. And here's what my first tiny habit prompt was. It was, after I finish breakfast, I will put on my walking shoes. That was all I had to do.
Okay. And then
And
what did
by
you
the
do
end of
when
the
you do
first
that?
week, I was putting on my walking shoes and I'd walk to the front door and back. And in another couple of weeks, I was putting on my walking shoes and, do it. And now I have a whole exercise routine. I have revised it and changed it because every time I'd run into, finding myself not doing it as often as I thought I should, I would stop and I would say, again, what's making this difficult to do? And part of one of the things that I had to change about my exercise thing, I realized that, how would I say? I look on, this is true confession. I still look on exercise as a waste of time. There's so many other things that I want to do. So I realize that I need to also give my brain something to do while I'm exercising, because otherwise my brain is looking at the watch and saying, how much longer do I have to do this?
Right.
So I started listening to podcasts
There you
like
go.
yours.
Oh, perfect.
So I would say that's one big thing that I've learned and that I teach in my workshop is to, when you come up against something that's difficult to do, don't give up, but start saying to yourself, well, what is making this hard to do? Don't depreciate yourself and saying, why am I having such a hard? Instead, just look at the thing and say, what is making it hard to do? And what new strategy can I come up with that'll make it easier for me?
So stop beating yourself up.
Exactly.
Which I will be honest, because we're true confessions here. Not that we're not changing the name of the podcast, but we're just being honest. It's very easy to beat yourself up.
Oh.
And so when we have the negative bias, then we beat ourselves up. And is there any worse combination than that?
Oh, and then it gets reinforced by our well-meaning children.
Oh, yes. Might be some
Mom, you should
colleagues.
be doing this. Mom, you should be doing that. Blah, 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 blah.
Okay. So we got to silence some voices, but it was easy because I think that most days people eat breakfast. Of course, I didn't used to back in the day. And there's some days that I really don't get to breakfast until later. And those would be the days where I'd miss that habit. If I didn't have the breakfast, I'd miss the habit, but that doesn't mean that the next day I do have breakfast, I can't get back on the habit.
Right.
And then to
Or
really,
you can change your prompt. The prompt might be, as soon after I brush my teeth,
right.
I will do such and such a thing.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a breakfast, but I was agreeing with you that that's an easy one to remember.
You can change it.
Yeah. And then that kind of stops that, negative space of thinking, well, how am I going to fill my time? And then, like you said, we go on to other things, right, that are giving us that dopamine. So why not use this in the right way? Well, that is perfect. That's perfect. Let's pause this podcast to hear from our sponsor.
The Neptune Society is the oldest and largest cremation service in the United States. For over 50 years, the Neptune Society has been proud to provide signature service to the families they've served. With a prearranged funeral plan, you can declare what you want done at the time of your passing, pay for it in advance, and not leave your survivors with the cost of your final arrangements. Call 314-266-2898. That's 314-266-2898.
Let's return to the podcast. Now, you just mentioned to my listeners that you were a paid caregiver for over 10 years.
Yes.
you've had a professional career and then you started your company. So, and you kind of gave us a taste of how you can help older adults, help them find more resilience and satisfaction. The people that you've been working with, what are some of the comments that you hear from them? Are they positive? Are they negative? Are they chewing on it? Are they picking it up and doing?
Most people, when they take my workshop, are saying, I'm realizing that I could do things I never thought I could do, that I didn't think I could do before. That's probably one of the biggest ones. There are so many ways in which we stop ourselves. I think I mentioned this earlier as we were talking. The whole idea of positive self-talk. One of the things that I've realized from practicing tiny habits myself is how important that positive self-talk is. We are so used since childhood of looking for what's for what's wrong. Just as an example, it's and our parents are, even if we had wonderful parents, they still corrected us, or sometimes maybe they didn't give us the praise when we thought we wanted it, and so on and so forth. I can remember I was a preacher's kid, and we would go out to some elegant lady's house for tea, and me and my sisters would be coming home, and we'd be driving back home in the car, and we'd shrink in the back of the back seat of the car because we knew our mom was going to say, "Now, girls."
You had your elbows on the
And
table. You let your saucer rattle. You dropped your spoon.
Yes, exactly.
You yawned.
And we have sort of, and as a result, we tend to do this with ourselves. The negative thing, that whole negative talk, it's that in itself is a habit that we've developed. So practicing tiny habits and attaching these little moments of celebration can really turn your life around. And I might be skipping ahead here, but I'm just going to describe one person that I took care of for a long time. Oh, I guess it was about 7 years. When I first came there, this lady had a stroke.
Okay.
Her short-term memory was not that good. She was wheelchair bound. And when I arrived, I can remember one of the first days I was I was supposed to help her do her exercises. She turned around to me. She bared her teeth and said, "I don't have to do anything that I don't want to do, and you can't make me do it." Whoo.
Wow.
What I discovered is that inside was such a mountain of anger and frustration because everybody was telling her what to do. "Now, Mom, you should do this. Now, Mom, you should do that." She resented the fact that the family had hired somebody, a stranger, to come in and look after her so that her husband could go out and play golf a couple times a week because he was her primary caregiver.
Yes.
There was just a whole pile of resentment. There's only one thing that I could do, and that was to help her appreciate everything that she could do. So when we managed to do a wheelchair transfer from the wheelchair, and she had to go to the bathroom and back and that kind of thing, every time I said, "Yay, yes, you did it. Isn't that great? You
Yes.
did it. And you took your pills. Good for you." And I just pour on this waterfall of appreciation and good for you, you did it. And with it did not happen overnight, but I would say within the year, she actually I don't know if she would even to this day call me by my name. I don't know if she remember, but she would say thank you. She would actually say thank you. She would smile at me. She would interact with me, where before I almost would have left that job and said, "I don't know if I can handle this," because,
Mhm.
there's just too much pushback.
Right, right. And you didn't feel like you were being successful either. And that
Right,
can
right.
happen as well. So, Polly, as we think about the tiny habits and we think about that trigger. Okay, after breakfast or after you brush your teeth, I'm going to pick up
Hmm.
the piece of paper. And I did pick it up, and I'm going to celebrate that victory that I at least went over to the stack and picked up a piece of
Hmm.
paper. How long, when we follow those clues, that you just gave us, cues rather, not
This
clues,
is one of the greatest myths about new habits,
how long does it
is
take?
that it takes 21 days or it takes 365 days or whatever. No, you can change a habit in an instant. Celebration.
Is by the celebration and the release of the dopamine and this
Right.
and that you have celebrated
And
you.
having a forgiving, gentle attitude with yourself. There are going to be times when you're going to skip it. There are going to be times, you're not perfect. And when those times happen, you just stop and say to yourself, forgive yourself and say, well, what's making this hard for me to do and how can I change it? Exercise, which is that is my most challenging one. I have changed my exercise thing. Oh, probably I've been doing this for about 3 years now. I would say at least 7 or 8 times. I have revised and changed how I exercise, when I exercise, because I would come up against this thing, but I would, instead of saying, well, that's it, I'm no good at exercise, I just don't have the willpower, and I'm too old, blah, 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 blah. Instead, I would say, what is making it hard to do? Well, I realize for one thing, my brain isn't exercise. It needs something to do so that it's not jumping ahead and wanting me to go on to the next task. I learned that I get sort of bored just doing the same thing all the time. So
Repetitively,
I got
yes.
an app. I got an app where you're dancing. Um, then I changed it. My most recent change has been this. My goal is to do 20 minutes of some form of aerobic movement every morning. The last thing that I've done, in addition to listening to podcasts, is I say to Alexa, I have one of those Alexa apps.
Yes.
Alexa, set the timer for 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Alexa just did it. That's hilarious.
And I just do 4 5-minute segments. That way I can do it. Otherwise, 20 minutes seems too long.
And
So
and that
so
works for
that's it.
you.
Be willing to be open to changing things and just stepping back. No self-recrimination, but just saying, what's making this hard to do and how can I make it easier for myself?
Oh, but you can't teach an old dog new tricks. How about that, Miss Polly? One of those old ageisms, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Exactly.
something we need to kick to the curb. And
Absolutely.
and Polly's right, and we do, and I do this as well. I think that getting out of my head with the ageisms that we're taught and or inferred was the hardest thing for me as I began to think about retirement, because part of my head was saying, well, I'm getting older and I can retire. I'm finally at that age, and having friends who said, well, why don't you just retire? Why do you need to be so busy? And the other part of my brain saying, what makes me think I can be doing nothing for the next 30 years? If I live to 100 like my mother, this is just not going to work for me. I'm going to be so bored. I'm going to be depressed and all that stuff. But juggling those two parts of my brain that were sending competing messages and letting the right one come through. And
Right.
listeners, just so that you know, it really is not as easy. We have to learn these habits so it becomes easier for us to do. There's times when we might not be feeling our best, and that's when things can pile up for us.
And I think that's where being willing to look at tiny steps. I lost one of my clients because of this inability to to go. I think one of the most damaging things in our society is the all or nothing. Well, if I screwed up one day, well, then forget it. I'm just not good at this. And I lost a client who had been ill, wasn't that seriously ill, but spent a couple days in the hospital. And as we know in caregiving circles, generally, when you're over the age of 80, every day that you spend in the hospital immobilized is probably going to mean at least a week or so of rehab because you've lost the use of your muscles, standing and walking.
Yes.
That's going to be a challenge. Well, this gentleman had been in the hospital for close to a week. He came home and all of a sudden, like, there come the physical therapists and, all these different people coming in to tell you what to do.
Yes.
And he did not have the ability, because he's one of these very rigid thinkers, not have the ability to see that step by step, little by little, he could get back to where he was. And sadly, he took his own life.
Oh,
And that really, those are the kinds of things that inspire me to do what I'm doing. Because for so many of us, if we can just learn to do things in a different way, we can still have a very full and enjoyable and deeply satisfying life. And we can learn how to deal with all the changes that happen because we become more flexible and we look at it from the point of view of, all right, what new strategy can I fix? Today, I just finished writing a blog about don't let Christmas overtake you without creating your own plan. Our families have changed. People get divorced. People get married. We lose partners. So many things change. Make your plan now. What are the things that you want to honor for Christmas? What
right.
are the things that would make you feel like you had a great holiday season? Whatever, religious tradition you celebrate. Instead of getting to January 1st feeling all lonely and because nothing happened the way you wanted it to happen.
Yes. Yes. Very interesting and very helpful. Polly, how can people get in touch with you? What is your contact info?
Yes, my website is www. And this is all one word, thrive, THRIVE after65.com. And it's the number 65.
Oh, perfect. And they can contact you there.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. I will have those in the show notes for everybody, but I know based on your experience as a Tiny Habits coach and based on your experience as a caregiver, we saw how you had 2 clients and what happened for each one. But if you could give a caregiver a tip, something from Tiny Habits, perhaps?
Yes. Okay.
What would
First of
you
all,
give us?
let me tell Alexa to stop. Alexa, stop. The 5 minutes is up.
It's a first.
Okay. For caregivers, there's 2 things I'd say. Number one, for yourself. Would you function better if you had a maid or a butler who had everything ready for you in the morning before you left for work? Well, why not create some tiny habits for yourself? Like after supper, I will set everything out for the next day. Or before I go to bed, I'll lay out my clothes so that they're ready to go for the next day. Or before I go back home, I'll always check to see if my gas tank is full. Little things like that. Turn those into tiny habits. One of my tiny habits was simply when I come in the door at night, I'll put my keys on the sideboard in the living room. It's because inevitably there would be a day where I'd be frantically looking, because I just threw my keys down wherever. If you take those little problem areas of your life that keep you from, that bring a lot of irritation, create a tiny habit for them. And then as far as giving care to others, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is the importance of positive thinking. I'm not Pollyanna for no reason. But it is so important. Your demeanor and people behave the way you treat them. If you treat people like they're weak and like they aren't capable of making decisions if you treat them like children, then that's what you're going to get. Just reinforcing even the smallest things. great for you. You took some, I see that today you had 8 ounces of water and it's not even 11 o'clock. Good for you. Those kinds of things, because so often the way we try to motivate older people is by saying, well, you should be doing this and you should do that and you should do this. Everybody is saying that to them. It's no wonder that as old people get crotchety and angry. I
Right.
would if people
Yes.
were constantly teaching me that or treating me that way. So positive reinforcement and supporting people emotionally that way is absolutely it's critical. So number
Yes.
one, create tiny habits for yourself. And number two, reinforce all the positive things that you can when you're taking care of somebody as a caregiver.
And I think caregivers, we all have lots to learn from Polly about our habits, because as a caregiver, it's so easy to beat yourself up too. Not
Oh
only
yeah.
do we try to beat ourselves up, but then we feel bad when we see our loved ones failing. So let's take these tiny habits and these cues to heart, and let's change our thinking and do our best, and then celebrate the victories that we see, even if they're itty bitty. Let's go ahead and celebrate them, because we want that dopamine to change that negative bias that we have. Thanks so much for being with me today, Polly. I really
You're welcome.
appreciate you coming on. I appreciate how you're challenging us to rethink on our aging, and that I don't care that at 79, you didn't think that you were too old to create a new business for
That's right.
yourself and those
Mhm.
you serve. So thank you. Thanks, Polly.
Oh, you're
And,
welcome.
and listeners, join us again on Aging in Place, Strategies and Answers. Thank you for joining me today. Please remember that this podcast is intended as guidance and not advice. Share this podcast with friends and family who are currently in crisis mode, or with people who would like to start developing their own roadmap for aging in place. Listeners, if you would like a deeper dive into a topic discussed during a podcast, please subscribe to Aging in Place, Strategies and Answers, where you will be able to access premium content. Or if you would like to suggest a topic for this podcast, please contact me at linda.agingstrategies@gmail.com. As always, I value the time you spend with me.